And we're back here on the Robust Opposition. And with me, I have our guests. I'm going to introduce them again. I have Patrick Walker, who was the co-founder of the Bernie or Bust movement. And his bio is this. Awakened from years of political slumber by the Iraq War, Patrick Walker cut his activist teeth with the Pennsylvania anti-fracking movement, organizing a successful protest in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, against fracking shill Tom Ridge. Fracking alerted him to the deeper problem of money in politics, especially its corruption of the supposedly progressive Democratic Party. To fight that corruption, he co-founded the Bernie or Bust movement and is now working to launch a successor movement aimed at fighting reforms, real enemies, neoliberals of both major parties. And we also have Alison Rose Levy, focusing on the environment, food, health, science, and policy. Alison has been a journalist and media observer and critic for over 20 years. The host of the Progressive Radio's network show, Connect the Dots, Alison has also written for Alternet, The Huffington Post, EcoWatch, Truthdig, and Tom Dispatch. Welcome, Alison. Are you guys there?
I'm here. Can you hear me? I know it's Alison's turn, but I just wanted to make sure I'm coming through.
All right. Well, I can hear you, and I'm going to ask you the first question, Patrick.
Okay.
So I want to ask you about your new organization, which you told me is called the Progressives or Bust. So why don't you tell us about that organization, why you founded it, and what you hope it shall accomplish while I go downstairs and get my power cord.
Okay, sure. Thanks a lot, Alison. Or not, sorry. Thanks a lot, Lauren. I'm delighted to be here. I'm also delighted to be here with Alison. But anyway, we're founding this as the Bernie or Bust successor movement because we're in a time when everyone, like rightly, or a lot of people rightly, want to fight Donald Trump, but they want to do it from a perspective that doesn't challenge the Democrats, like the neoliberal Democrats who basically just caused Trump to be elected. And we think that if they're allowed to hide behind it, we're not really making any progress. This is a teachable moment for the American public. And if they learn to oppose their enemies in both parties, the Trump Republicans and the Clinton Democrats, then we're getting somewhere. And that's what this new movement is about.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And I'm really happy to be here on the show with you too, Patrick, with that initiative and, here with you and Lauren. So great to be here also. So what do you see as the next steps for the movement?
Oh, okay. Well, we already have a model to go by because in a lot of ways, we're generalizing Bernie or Bust and adapting it to the situation. Like we saw Bernie, like not as, the perfect ideal politician, but as someone doing something better than anyone else had done in politics in a long time. And we felt that we could use him to raise consciousness and piggyback on him to really revise progressivism within this country. And like now we're generalizing it. We feel that the neoliberals who attacked Bernie brought themselves out of the closet, like, during the whole campaign. And now under Trump, rather than letting them hide, we want to fight them. We don't want people to forget what they did.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Talking about Trump, with all the horrific things that he's been doing, do you think we run the risk of being told that we're crazy? I mean, there is a qualitative difference here between the kinds of things that Trump is doing and the things that Hillary would be doing. I know, Alison, you have some thoughts on that.
Yes, I think we have a lot of people. I mean, if there's any upside to having this incredibly out of control, pro-fossil fuel, winner-take-all elected official with no real feeling for democratic process and no history in engaging with it at all, as the chief executive of the United States, it is that it at last makes it crystal clear to millions more people what we were coasting, toward, and what we now, are facing and is alive and current. And in that, it has brought out a lot of people in opposition. And I think we have a much bigger tent who really get the problem. But I think it's our task to make sure, that there's broader education to, the wider solutions that really foundationally come from a critique of neoliberalism and in both parties on either side. So that, and I know people can be confused by that because they hear the word liberal and they think, well, that's just a different kind of liberal. That must mean a Democrat. That must mean who I am. Some people who are less well informed or engaged than the Sanders people, and the people that we know and have been working with. And so I think it's really important to define that term so everyone understands it's not confined to one party, but it does spread across both parties and is in effect a two-headed threat. And the kind of enabling role that the traditional Democrats all too often play and have played throughout successive administrations will not be our friend in really grasping, and taking back democracy at this very late stage 11th hour.
Yes, and I'm very concerned about this effort to demonize Trump for things that Obama also did. For example, I posted on my Facebook page when you're talking about how Trump greenlighted the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline, don't forget that it was Obama who fast-tracked the Keystone South, fast-tracked the Dakota Access Pipeline in the first place, as well as all the other pipeline infrastructure projects, including LNG terminals, drilling in the Arctic. He originally proposed that we end the 30-year oil drilling ban in the Atlantic before he changed his mind, and that banned it, and also in the Arctic as well. But it's very dangerous. The other example would be the TPP. A lot of liberal activists that we worked with, Alison, were saying, don't credit Trump for stopping the TPP. It was us. Well, of course it was us. We've been working really hard. But the facts are that the Republican population, the general public, when polled prior to Trump railing about it on the campaign trail, was in favor of the TPP. And afterwards, public opinion shows that they're now against it. And we know that had Hillary become president, Obama would have fast-tracked it. He would have put it forward in the lame duck session, and Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan would have railroaded through.
Absolutely. This was a classic wake-up call to the neoliberal framework that has been driving our bus of government in the wrong direction. And this was an artifact of the Wall Streeters on both parties, on both sides, and, working as with you and all of the great groups that were working in opposition to the TPP and reporting on it, we could clearly see where the votes were going. Senator Sanders was standing against it, but many Democrats were not. You had a Wall Street funded president pushing it. And I recall that when the first time I ever heard Joseph Stiglitz speak on this topic, and he talked about Obama's role, and he characterized it as payback for the campaign donations that had helped him get elected. I was sitting there with two friends, and later, neither of them could recall hearing this. These were good Democrats. It was like they had cotton wool in their ears. They didn't want to know because, we all want to think there were white hats. And certainly, as you say, there are enormous quantitative differences. This has been a right-wing driven agenda. But the so-called liberal left, the neoliberals have run along with it in time, and we need to face up to that rather than going back and dipping in the same diminishing well of diminishing returns for the whole population that we find ourselves with when we support them blindly.
Yes, and I'd also like to say that it's very concerning to me that I'm seeing the very same liberals who don't follow the policy as closely, all of a sudden they're waking up again after 8 years. I remember people that were working with me, you know, to try to impeach Bush and Cheney, and were posting about all the horrible things that they did. And then they started making excuses about Obama. And it's like they weren't even following the policy. And some of the posts on his last day were nauseating, because they were basically talking about how this man had such dignity and grace, and, you know, what a wonderful father and husband and orator. And, you know, it was all focused on the style and not the substance. And this is the danger that we run. And Rachel Maddow is feeding right into this thing. I wanted to know if either of you had any thoughts about this Russia, Russia, Russia. It seems to me like they're trying to delegitimize Trump's election to avoid taking responsibility for the horrible candidate they ran, the horrible race that they ran. And there are so many other reasons to delegitimize him, but certainly hacking our elections is not one of them. So Patrick, let's go to you first, because
thank you, because I think both Alison and I have very strong thoughts on it. You know, it was really a question of which of us would jump in first. I was furious over the Russian business, and I mean, for that matter, you know, it's so crazy how many Democrats exercise tribal party loyalty and jump into these things without examining the evidence. You know, I mean, I even found great anti-fracking activists like Josh Fox, you know, buying into this party line. And I mean, that's really dangerous. You know, when you get somebody that credible, you know, I mean, this is insane, because this is really what it is. The neoliberals are trying to hide their blame for losing to Trump, and they're doing it at the risk of provoking a nuclear war with Russia. I mean, what can you like about that?
Yeah, there's nothing you can like about it. And I found it particularly offensive because New York in April of 2016 was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first several states that showed severe election integrity anomalies. There was, in fact, a voter purge, you know, and a lot of problems with our primary. And I think it's highly questionable who really won that. That primary legitimately. There were poll closures and everything else, and that was a turning point primary for the Democratic election. So I have been tracking the election integrity issue ever since, all the way through to California. I got onto it early, and and it was like every time I posted anything about it on Facebook, you know, all of the followers that normally comment would just shy away and be frightened. And so, you know, here you have a thing. It's like, if you care about election integrity, if you care about voter suppression, you care about it for everybody, you don't ignore it, then come in at the 11th hour, cry foul, claim the election has been hacked with absolutely no evidence. And all of the evidence that was presented has been, you know, inadequate, debunked, not well sourced. It was from some secret person who said something. You know, this isn't even journalistically credible. As Glenn Greenwald has documented extensively. Matt Taibbi at Rolling Stone has confirmed this. So what are we talking about? You know, a meme is put out about fake news and, you know, credible news sources, and then you have all of the mainstream media lining up behind an undocumented fiction.
Well, we did a show about that. We talked about fake news and the Russian scare, and we talked about the Washington Post running that scandalous story by Prop or Not, which was completely unsourced. We don't know who those people were. And, you know, we have everybody backing the intelligence estimate, or maybe it was intelligence evaluation. I can't remember, but it's one step short of being definitive. You know, I read an article recently that said the difference between those two terms. It's one step short of being definitive. And why are we getting in bed with the CIA, which has interfered in elections 82 times, as well as overthrown 3 democratically elected presidents, just because they won't play ball with American corporate interests? So I want to move on to another topic that's related, and that is how the Democrats just don't get it. Okay, so after the election, 3 days after the election, they were meeting with their big donors, including Soros. They then proceeded to elect Chuck Schumer to be the minority leader in the Senate, who gets the most money from Wall Street. They reelected Nancy Pelosi to be the leader of the House, and she famously said she didn't think the Democrats did anything wrong. Yes, Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders are supporting Keith Ellison, but he has gone so far to the center in his effort to become DNC chair, to the point of, you know, basically in the HuffPost documentary, the HuffPost debate the other night, none of the 7 candidates could admit that the DNC rigged the election in favor of Hillary. He walked back his comment that the DNC should reinstate its ban on accepting money from lobbyists. And he also endorsed Steve Patel, who is this billionaire who jumped through all sorts of hoops to become the chair of the California State Party, just because he's a big fundraiser, and would end up voting. He's on the DNC board. He'd end up voting on Keith Ellison's nomination. He also, apologized to, didn't apologize. He accepted the apology of Haim Saban, who basically called Keith Ellison an anti-Semite. So I think what's really going on here with the Democratic Party is pretty disgusting. And I wanted to know your thoughts on that. First, let's go to Patrick and then Alison.
Well, for one thing, I am so grateful to people like you for reporting this, because the only thing I would object to, is like when you talk about it being centrist, because what passes for centrist is really a form of extremism. Basically a form of extremism that serves plutocrats and puts the entire society at risk has taken over both parties. And you're perfectly right, about the Democrats. This bothers me. I was reading posts on Facebook today, basically saying, what's wrong with the Democrats? Like the Clinton neoliberals lost? Like hell they lost. Like they're alive in the shadows. And that's what our new movement is about. We don't want them to slip into the shadows, because that's where they're most dangerous. We want to expose them. Anyway, I'll give Alison some say if she would like. Sure.
The big problem that I have also is this is not just about looking back in history to a party that has, not only in the last election year, certainly most egregiously in the last election year, lost the trust of a great many people. This is about a party that sadly, and I speak as someone who is a lifelong Democrat, has over the decades lost the trust of the American people, which is why many former Democratic voters, trade unionists, blue-collar workers switched to Trump in this election. It has lost the incoming young generation who look at the whole media thing that the older generation is all inculcated with and believing, and they just laugh, snort and laugh. It's so transparently dishonest. A psychologist, it's true that Trump is a terrible narcissist, but a psychologist has really recently called Hillary Clinton inauthentic, which I think is how she comes across. And this kind of doublespeak we're seeing in the new minority leader, Chuck Schumer. The same doublespeak. He votes in Pompeo, he votes in these other cabinet positions, and then his spokesperson says he will evaluate each cabinet position on the person's own merits and background and expertise. Well, none of them has any expertise. And that's the old doublespeak again, where I say I'm going to do one thing, and this is what the Democrats do, and then they do something else. So they just keep telling you what they think they're supposed to do, and they keep doing something else. And I'm very concerned about Chuck Schumer. If he's supposed to, as Democratic minority leader, be leading, the resistance to all of these fast-coming, terrible initiatives, I think we're really in deep, deep trouble. With him as the leader. In New York State, he has left, for the last 3 or 4 years, he's left New Yorkers hanging out to dry with the looming death threat of a gas pipeline through a nuclear power plant. I have participated in protests in front of his office where no one has even come down to speak to. Hundreds of people have gathered many, many times over. He's a known Wall Streeter. Now he's finally saying that he will oppose the nomination of Rex Tillerson. What took him so long was who was he consulting with to get permission, to do this. And so obviously it's going to have to be in the people's hands. And, instead of leading the charge, the Democrats all too often are playing a rearguard role because they too are financially benefiting from the money in politics and the buying of our elected officials that's going on both the right and the left.
Yes, and Chuck Schumer and Chris Dodd, who is no longer a senator, were the two senators who led the charge against repealing the carried interest loophole, which, as you know, is a way for hedge fund managers to pay only 15% on their income. These are some of the richest people in the world. They're worth billions of dollars, and they are paying less percent tax than Warren Buffett's secretary because of Democrats like Chuck Schumer and Chris Dodd, because all these guys live in Manhattan and Greenwich, Connecticut.
Bingo.
So we have one here in California, that's Dianne Feinstein. Her husband, Richard Bloom, is a big billionaire. He, until recently, was the head of CBRE Ellis, which is a big real estate firm. And a lot of people don't know this. I did a little video on my YouTube channel a few years ago called Save the Post Office, when the Santa Monica Post Office was closing. Why did that happen? Because of the Postal Fiscal Accountability Act. I forget the name of it, but it basically said that post offices had to pay, the Postal Service had to fund health benefits for their employees 75 years into the future. So essentially, for employees who weren't even born yet, no other agency had to do this. So this forced the post office to start selling off their buildings, and their buildings some of them had very valuable murals in them, like here in Venice, California, that were commissioned during the WPA to put people back to work. What's his name? Joel Silver, a producer, bought that building. I think he subsequently sold it. And he said, don't worry, the public can come in a couple of times a year to see this mural. So, and what we found out was that Richard Bloom, his firm had the exclusive no bid contract to sell or lease these post offices. So Dianne Feinstein has been totally unresponsive to her constituents. I cannot tell you how many times I've done either protests or citizen lobby meetings with her. She is completely unresponsive, and the woman is planning to run again. She just had her pacemaker replaced, and she's 83 years old. Someone asked her if she's going to retire, and she said, as long as I'm healthy, I'm going to keep going, stuffing her personal coffers. So we got to get rid of these billionaires. What do you guys think of the effort of the Bernie-crats to take over the Democratic Party? We just got 600 Bernie-crats elected as delegates to the California Democratic Party. That's 60% of the elected delegates. Now, don't get too excited, because the elected delegates represent only 1/3 of all the delegates. So we still have an uphill climb. I want to find out if you think there's any merit in the effort to take over the Democratic Party, and if you think it makes a difference whether we're talking about state parties or national.
Could I address that first? Because that has a lot to do with why we organize this movement. Yes. I wrote an article about this. I mean, I wrote an article. It was sort of the launching point for getting this going. It was an article published in 2 parts in Op-Ed News, calling "Let's drive neoliberals to political extinction." And one of the things that I mentioned in the article about the efforts to take over the Democratic Party is that I think they should be treated with skepticism, but not dogmatism. Like, in other words, I'm totally on Naomi Klein's page that basically, we have to definitively wrest the Democratic Party from neoliberals, or we have to abandon it. And personally, I really don't care which of those options. I just want neoliberals are parasites who are ruining, I mean, they're ruining U.S. politics. They should be spoken of in those terms. If we want to educate the public, we speak of neoliberals as parasites. I don't hear Bernie and a lot of the other groups doing that. I think part of the value of a group like ours is that we make it more permissible for them to do that we pressure them to be in a position where they can actually speak more aggressively against the people who share the party with them.
Yes, I see. Yeah, I see that too. I think also that, we also have to think strategically. Our rights to protest, our rights to be on the streets, our rights to have a voice are going to be tremendously under threat in the current administration. So this is a process. I wish it were an overnight thing where we could bring complete change. But, we need to have at the state and local level the right, officials who can be pressured. And we'll see the difference between the blue states here as well, who can be pressured to respond to their constituents, as occurred this week with the protests at the various airports in different states where the mayor, the governor, this happened in New York, it also happened in California, were driven by what the people did to say, yes, I am with the people, even if maybe they didn't like it to begin with. So to have sanctuary cities, all of that will also depend on our ability to pressure and work with the politicians who are in place, but also not just focus on the national elections, but to bring in people on those levels so that we have more favorable environments for stopping fossil fuel aggressive extraction activities as they come through certain places, as we've seen with North Dakota. We had a very rigid right-wing extractionist Republican leadership in the state, which has been a big part of the problem. So I think we make a move, strategically, I agree with Patrick, anywhere we can, just to set up a better and more favorable environment for the things that we are going to need going forward, with the target of getting money ultimately out of politics so that we don't have these beholden officials, which on the Republican side don't even pretend to serve anybody but their own corporate interests and the billionaires. And on the Democratic side are double speaking because they're maintaining a fiction and they're doing a little for the public and then they're pocketing more for themselves. And so until we solve that monetary problem and get people who are beholden only to the people in, then I think we have to work with the landscape we have as we transition it.
Well, that's what we're doing here in California. With these ADAM elections where we got all our Bernie-crats in there, the first act is going to be to try to get Kimberly Ellis to be the state party chair, because the leading candidate, who's the head of the LA County Democratic Party and the vice chair of the state party, Eric Bauman, who I have dubbed Boss Bauman, basically takes money from every single industry. He took $12,500 a month from Big Pharma during the entire Prop 61 campaign. This was a ballot initiative in November to reduce drug costs for 14% of Californians who are on public programs. And 70% of the people were in favor of it when it started. And then, of course, Big Pharma sunk $109 million into it. Big Pharma is the biggest lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and they spent $109 million just in California to kill that initiative. And this guy Bauman was taking money from them. And yet he says, his excuse was, I have to make a living. It's hysterical, really. He already has a job. He makes $145,000 a year as being the assistant to Anthony Rendon, who is the Speaker of the legislature, the Speaker of the Assembly. And so we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to endorse a gubernatorial candidate for 2018 that agrees to ban fracking, sign single-payer legislation, support a state-owned bank, support free public college and universities like New York did. So I think with the presidency, the House, and the Senate being in Republican hands, I think that we have our best chance to achieve change on the local and state level. But the question is, and this is going to be my final question to you both, how do we mobilize the support out there? Because I feel like the Women's March is being co-opted to some extent by the Democratic Party and the liberal establishment groups that answer to them, such as Move On and Planned Parenthood and Emily's List. And, you know, they did have some good actions. They had the Drain the Swamp thing last Tuesday, in which they asked people to go outside their senator's office to get them to vote against these horrible nominees. And then they had they're having this letter writing campaign. I think it's on Tuesday. And I initially posted this kind of mocking post like, oh, Trump, watch out, the postcards are coming. And a lot of people kind of agreed with me, but then people said, you know what? Some of these people, like a specific friend of mine said, I'm a mom with small children. I have to stay home. I can't be out there protesting and organizing these protests like you. So this is some step. And I kind of revised my position. I said, if these postcard writing parties are used to organize women to be autonomous and to take some actions on issues that concern them in their own communities, and not just following the orders of, you know, Move On, et cetera, then this could amount to something. Your thoughts?
Well, I'll take this one first.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
You know, and then Patrick, you can conclude, I guess. But, you know, it's like almost all of my reporting and all of my, you know, policy coverage and everything, an attempt to help bridge to women an entree into the policy conversation, because I think that women are used to saying, I want to do it on the local level, I want to do it for my family, for my community, and that's the source of motivation. Of course, that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that's wrong with it is if then you abdicate all the larger structures that you know, run our entire system to these oligarchic patriarchs. I mean, that's a big problem. So from that standpoint, I would regard myself as like a feminist from day one. But the problem is that when you sign on to this, you know, the March group and all of that, then they start dictating their agenda. And so my worry is that people are not sophisticated enough in doing their own policy homework, perhaps, to be able to counter that agenda. And as important as women's health is, women's reproductive rights are, this, you know, inclusion of all people in a society, you know, we basically have overarching problems that affect the entire system, from the environment to money in politics to globalization, which is a corporate takeover that I don't think we completely shut out the door just because we stopped the TPP. These will change the quality of our food, our life, our health, and our ability to sustain on planet Earth. That's big picture stuff. Coming at that purely through the entree point of women's reproductive rights, as important as that is, you know, do you ever get further? You know, how long will that take? And so, you know, I've seen people circulating a list of groups to support, and it's very dense in that quadrant. And I think that women, I'm glad to see women involved, but I think we have to go beyond just what serves ourselves and really look at the leverage points that serve the whole society. And that's why I'm very encouraged by this progressive movement, because if we do that education, more people can and will join us.
Patrick.
Oh, and thanks. You know, I mean, I think Alison made, you know, some outstanding points there, and I just basically want to hop on them. You know, like I'm a man, and I am by no means in love with the patriarchy. I am by no means in love, you know, with what males and what white males in particularly have done throughout history. But it seems we're in a period, and I mean, like Hillary Clinton is the perfect representative of it. You know, it's not as if they're asserting a woman's voice. It's basically they're showing they can play the patriarchy's game as well as the patriarchs have played it. And I really think that we need some of the traits more traditionally associated with women, you know, that basically women, you know, are anti-violence, they're anti-war, they're protective, you know, that they're sensitive to nuance, that they, you know, like, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's not merely stereotyping. I mean, there's an element to it, but a woman journalist, Katie Johnstone made these exact points. I really like her work. And, she did this in an article, and I'm basically taking up her thoughts here, that like women and, and humanity gets nowhere when women simply join the patriarchy and prove they can play the patriarchy's game well. We need something better than that.
Yes, and we had Katie Johnstone on our show that when I was telling you about fake news and Russia. So I want to thank you guys for being guests on our show today. We hope we can have you back sometime in the future.
I think we'd both be delighted.
Yeah, definitely.
And
so much fun.
Yes, and we'll be coming up in a minute with our next segment of the Robust Opposition.